What is the greatest game of all time? This has been the question that gamers have argued about for decades now, and it doesn't seem to stop anytime soon. I can only imagine if you have a bunch of staff members and you ask them, we're doing an article, guys, on the top 10 greatest games of all time. What are they? The amount of mugs flying and friendships broken and hair being pulled out and all the meticulous research that goes into it. It is truly a big question, and Game Informer has answered it for us again. Instead, though, they did the greatest 300 games of all time for their 300th issue. I actually thoroughly enjoyed looking over all the games personally, and their number one pick took me by surprise, so I kind of want to talk about their choice. And before I get into that, I just want to say that whatever your favorite game is, don't be upset if it's not number one on someone else's list. The greatest game of all time is completely subjective. It depends on who you are and what you play. There's a lot of factors that go into it. If we're being completely honest, no one's ever going to know what the greatest game of all time is. We have a good idea of what some of the greatest games of all time are, but ultimately in the end, you're never going to be happy, I think, with someone else's list. But I actually usually am pretty happy because for example, Game Informer's magazine, they talk very briefly about each game and just kind of what it meant to them and the impact it had on the industry as a whole. And I think that's what these lists are about, and I think that's pretty cool. And I always like to get someone else's insight into how they feel about particular games. So, without further ado, here is the greatest game of all time. It hasn't changed, no siree. The game that I showed, or the image that I showed beforehand, happens to be the same game after all. That's right. Game Informer's greatest game of all time is in fact The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. And here's a little bit about what they said about the game itself. They said, almost every game is considered a breakthrough, and perhaps even one of the greatest games of all time. Next to Mario, no series of games has maintained such a high bar of excellence. Determining the order of the Zelda games on this list was a difficult task, as most entries had at least one supporter that gave a passionate plea as to why it should be on the list or higher than another game in the series. Oddly, the same cannot be said for A Link to the Past. Most Game Informer's staffers put it at the top, not just for the series, but all games. It ended up being a runaway choice, both for its historical importance and the fun it still delivers today. And I think about this game a lot actually lately because I am a flip-flopper when it comes to the Zelda games. Personally, I think they are the greatest series. It's the greatest series of all time. Just because of the amount of excellence that goes into each game, and after I finish playing one, I go, yes, this is it. This is the best Zelda game I have ever played. Hands down, nothing can beat it. And then, a year from now, I'll go, was that the best one ever? And this is probably honestly one of my top 5 favorite Zelda games. Like I said, at one point I think it's number 1, but then I switch between the Wind Waker and Ocarina of Time and Breath of the Wild and Skyward Sword and so on and so forth. The Zelda series is truly something special. It's not just special to me, it's special to a lot of people. If you're not a fan of Nintendo, chances are you're still a fan of this series, because this series is the epitome of excellence. Every single entry in this franchise has been extremely well done, except those weird computer ones that Nintendo technically didn't make, so. And I know a lot of people think that Ocarina of Time is the greatest Zelda game, and in a lot of ways, I can see where they're coming from, but when they gave it to A Link to the Past, I can easily see where Game Informer is coming from. For example, everything you love about the Ocarina of Time is because of A Link to the Past. While the original Zelda, set a very good structure and groundwork for the whole franchise as a whole, it was really discombobulated. It was very confusing. You didn't know where you were going and what you were doing, and you had to kind of figure it out, similar to Breath of the Wild, but it could get really annoying trying to handle the map and remember which way is what in that game. A Link to the Past, however, really helped to remedy that problem, and it had set dungeons, and all the gameplay that you love in Ocarina of Time was basically inspired by A Link to the Past. It improved the Zelda series, honestly, in a way that the formula still holds up to this day. And just like Game Informer said, that game is still, to this day, an absolute joy to play. It's timeless, it's a classic, it hasn't aged at all. It feels perfect, like the way the controls feel and the way the guy moves and the soundtrack, all of it is still refreshing. Whereas some things, even in Ocarina of Time, you can tell it's outdated and there are problems. But A Link to the Past, it brings it and it keeps it, and that's something really special in a video game, especially one as old as A Link to the Past is. Now, this is in no way, shape, or form saying that I think A Link to the Past is definitely the greatest game of all time. I'm not even going to try to answer that for anybody else other than myself, what my favorite game is. And to be quite honest, I'm not even certain what my favorite video game is. That tends to change on and off between a few as well. And don't take it too hard if you haven't played this game or if you disagree with it. I think it's great if you disagree with it, honestly, because that's what the beauty of being a gamer is. You play the games you love, you fall in love with them, you have your own list. I'm certain you have your own list of what your favorite games are, and I'm certain you have in your mind what your favorite game of all time is. And I would love to know, actually, what your favorite game of all time is, whether you disagree or agree with what Game Informer states. I do highly recommend you pick up their magazine this time because, like I said, there are 299 other games on this list that I feel like deserve your attention and deserve a nod in a lot of ways. And I really appreciate what they've done here, just like I appreciated what Edge Magazine did. They did a 100 greatest games of all time list a couple years ago, I believe. And yeah, that's honestly where I'm going to leave this. If you like the content, please feel free to leave a like or subscribe to my channel. If you don't like it, feel free to leave a dislike. It's totally okay by me. And always bear comfort in the fact that if you don't like my content, that I am in fact Bradley Overrated, even with 15 subscribers only. Alright guys, that's it for me. I'm out like a trout. I hope you guys have a good one. Take care of yourselves. Bye bye.